Take 3. All right. Today, we are going to dive a little bit deeper into the overview of the different categories of assessment that we have. As we're talking about everything, I want you to be thinking about any experiences that you have in classrooms, whether it's your own experience as a teacher, videos, whatever it may be. And we're going to culminate today with some smaller group discussions and hopefully organizing of thoughts around pros and cons of the various different assessment groups that we have, okay? So today is not going to be getting into detailed specifics of individual assessment types. We're going to be looking much more at the broader categories of assessment, all right? Next week, and this is kind of going to be the structure for the whole semester, my goal is to focus much more on special education assessment next week. So the idea will be spend a couple of days on broader assessment ideas, categories, topics, examples, and then the second week of a unit really be looking at what that looks like in the special education environment. And to the degree I can, I'm going to differentiate between how those are different at the lower elementary levels versus the secondary levels. All right. So, okay. The way that I kind of look at it is that we can break up assessment into 3 kind of subcategories of when, what, and how. We spoke a little bit about the how on Tuesday with formal and informal. We'll spend a little bit more time on that. The when has to do more with when in the structure of the unit, the year, the month, whatever the time frame we're looking at is going to be as formative and summative assessment. How many of you are familiar with those concepts? A little bit? Some? Okay, good. And that's usually the case. What is going to be based on this idea of curriculum-based assessment versus curriculum-based measurement? These two are hard to kind of remember which one is which. I wish they came up with different terms. I still usually have to reference a text to make sure that I'm getting it right. So I apologize in advance about that. How many of you have heard of those two ideas before? A little bit, some, a little bit less than formative and summative. So we'll get into that. And then we have the formal and informal. So formative and summative. Let's start off with you guys. What is formative? What is formative assessment? Okay.
That's an assessment that's made during a lesson.
Okay.
Kind of like thumbs up, thumbs down. Or like.
Good. So during the lesson. So when we talk about that when, absolutely during the lesson, during the unit, thumbs up, thumbs down is a good one. Does formative assessment trigger any thoughts for anyone else? Specifically, not specifically.
I say more so like checking for understanding.
Okay, good.
Like
Yeah. Excellent, excellent. So checking for understanding. Anything else? Yeah, no? Oh. All right, good. So I think that those are both right on point. So formative assessment is assessment that is going to be more ongoing. It's more about checking where your students are. It's less connected to that idea of a grade, right? When we talk about formative assessment, it can be structured. It can be questions that are asked within a curriculum. We can have exit tickets as a form of formative assessment. And we'll see that there's a Venn diagram of formative and summative. We can have planned activities. So these are all structured forms of formative assessment. We can also very easily have unstructured forms of formative assessment. So what might an unstructured formative assessment be? What might that look like in a classroom? You as a teacher come up with a question that you had not planned and you ask it, right? Something as simple as that can be a formative assessment. It's not going to be the case that you plan for every moment where you need to check for understanding. You're going to be teaching a lesson, you're going to get to a topic, you'll cover it, you think you did a great job. My biggest method of formative assessment when I'm working with you guys is looking at your eyes. When I see blank stares, I stop. That's my formative assessment of you. Is that structured or unstructured? Very much unstructured. I'm not like, okay, I'm just going to like stare at a blank wall and now I look at you, right? I'm always looking at your eyes. I'm always gauging your level of understanding. There's body language. There's all these different things that really lead to information for me, information for you guys, that will allow you to know whether or not your students are with you in some capacity or not. What are some other forms of unstructured formative assessment that we might use? Yeah.
What using the questions that students ask as a formative assessment?
Absolutely. How I know how I'm thinking of that. What are you thinking of?
Like just if any time they would raise their hand and ask a question, would that be a form of formative assessment?
I absolutely think it can. And what I would be looking at in that situation is the question that you are asking leading appropriate to get you a response that you actually need, right? In other words, if you ask an on-topic question that is going to help you further understand the material, great. You may not be there yet, but you're definitely headed in the right direction. And I can keep engaging with you. If you ask me a question that is going to lead you on some wild goose chase, that's information for me that, oh, maybe you're not quite understanding what on earth we're talking about here. All right, good, excellent. Think a little bit more subject specific. Think reading, think writing, think math, think social studies. What are those things as a teacher that you might be looking for that you could treat as formative assessment? Let me help you guys structure it a little bit more. In a math class, right? Give me a couple of examples. So we know that we have the curriculum is going to give us a workbook page. So that's obviously a form of formative assessment. What else? Yeah, go ahead.
But asking them what they think we need to do, like if they see a plus sign, asking them, okay, what do you think we're going to do with this equation? Are we going to subtract or add?
Absolutely, absolutely. So in that specific case, I would call that, and this is kind of limited to my field, but I would call that an intraverbal response. So can you, where if I say Mary had a little, that's an intraverbal response. When you add, your sum is, and I would have done this bigger or smaller than your add-ins, right? So that it could be bigger, right? I K to 2 before you get to negatives. Things like that, where you're moving along, and can they apply the little tricks that you've taught them to what you're actually doing, right? Ask them those questions. What do I do next? Given maybe some background information. Are they recognizing that? Good. What else? What about writing? If you're in a writing class, what might be a form of formative assessment? Unstructured formative assessment. Yeah.
Could it be like spontaneously asking students to write an example of blank and then examine it afterwards, or would that be structured?
No, I think it would be unstructured. It could that could go either way. That could go either way. Let's come back to that. Yeah.
What about peer review?
Okay. How so?
Just going over, like grammatically checking each other's papers.
Good.
I'm not sure if that's structured or unstructured.
I think that, again, that could be either, and there's definitely going to be an overlap here. So like, let's say, let's build a writing lesson, okay? So I give a prompt, I talk about the prompt, we go over the different characteristics. Chances are my students have a rubric of what they're looking for. They've probably, if that's the direction you're going, you've probably been paired with a partner, you have a little bit of rapport, like there's a whole thing that goes into it. Now, given all of that, you're writing, and I, the teacher, say, okay, everybody stop. Pass your papers over and check for grammar. So that's that in the moment. And in that case, you're just using the peer as the teacher, using the rubric as the tool, but it's that in the moment. I didn't decide that that was going to be what I was doing before, or maybe I did. That's what I'm checking on. Good. So with this unstructured formative assessment, the world is your oyster, right? There's no set thing that is or is not formative assessment. The level of planning, the level of structure that goes into it defines it as structure or unstructured. Okay. What for some of these unstructured formative assessments, I'm not sure I'm going to ask this the right way, but what tool do we as teachers have for performing that assessment? I didn't ask that well, did I? So I can ask questions, and that is, questioning is a tool that I have for conducting formative assessment, right? I can give activities, and I can collect those activities. And that is a tool that I have for formative assessment. In the moment, as I'm teaching, right? What tool do I have to conduct a wide array of formative assessment? Terrible question. See if you can get there. As my students are working, what tool do I have? What can I be doing in order to conduct formative assessment? I'll ask it another way. As my students are working, what should I be doing in order to assess them? Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Walking around the classroom. Is that what you guys were thinking of? Good, good. Walking around the classroom, being active even while you are not actively teaching. To me, a lot of formative assessment is putting yourself in a position to gather information in that moment that maybe you weren't necessarily looking for, right? You are let's say a first grade teacher. You've just, it's early in the year, you've just gone over or reviewed or introduced addition and subtraction. You start to walk around the classroom. You have the students are working on a page of addition and subtraction problems. What might be something that you need to assess in that moment?
Using addition and subtraction in their own way.
Excellent.
And you can see that through their paper as you're observing and walking around.
Perfect. Nice job.
Right in there, you can assess them, see what they know, and assist them how needed.
Good, good. So, Hope, right? Hope, yeah, I got it. Okay. I'm going to get everyone by the end of the semester. So when you're teaching addition and subtraction, or any two closely related concepts, you teach one, teach the other, you put them together, you release your students to do what they do. What are they all going to do? They're all going to forget about the second one, or just do the second one, right? Whatever's more common, they're going to do. And you're going to start to go around and you're going to start to see patterns in student responses, right? I'm not seeing any students who are subtracting when they should add, but I am seeing students who are adding when they should subtract. So I've just done a formative assessment. I've just, in the moment, been able to assess my students to identify, okay, we need to stop. We need to, let me remind you guys, this means go up, this means go down, whatever you're gonna do, right? So that goes to what the goal is of formative assessment. And the goal of formative assessment is to make decisions about what to do next in the moment, right? When on Tuesday, when I was talking about everything can be assessment, what defines assessment is what you do with the data. If I give that same assignment, I walk around the classroom, I see you added wrong, or you added right, you subtracted wrong, you subtracted wrong, you subtracted wrong, you subtracted right, you subtracted wrong. And I see these patterns and I don't do anything with it. I've lost that formative assessment opportunity. That isn't to say that I didn't assess. That isn't to say that I can't make a decision, but I'm no longer in the moment, right? Whatever the moment is, I'm no longer in it. So if I collect all those responses, I grade the work, I give it back, and then tomorrow I review. Is that formative or is that summative? Is it? You've lost that in the moment, but it's not, maybe not the end of the unit, right? So to me, the value of formative assessment, and I don't have an answer to that one way or another. The value of formative assessment is that ability to stop and correct right then and there. When you see the error, that's when teaching is the freshest. That's when learning is the freshest. Does that make sense to everyone? Anyone vehemently disagree or not so vehemently? All right, cool. So we're going to come back to that in a bit. Summative. What are some examples of summative to you guys? Tests, right? Good. What else? Quizzes. Okay.
It's those at the end of a unit, has a goal, questions at the end, you have to do that.
Good. Okay. Yeah. So maybe like end of chapter questions, right? Good. Think longer term. What else is summative? Projects. What kind of testing? Standardized tests, those state tests, end of year tests. Maybe they're not even standardized, maybe they're curricular, but that end of year test. So you have somewhere, you have a unit that is defined. That can be a chapter, that can be a topic, that can be a month, that can be a school year, it can be arbitrary, it can be more defined, but that summative, that summation across concept somewhere here usually involves synthesis of multiple ideas, right? So that longer term is your summative assessment. Again, these can be structured. They can be, or they are usually structured, right? They can be unstructured, but it's much harder to conduct high quality, unstructured, summative assessments. The reason for that has to do with the goal of summative assessment. What is the goal of summative assessment? What did I say here? I said goal is to make long-term decisions about what to do next. What do you guys think? What is the purpose behind summative assessment? Beyond that. Yeah.
I mean, to see if your students like get what you're teaching.
Okay, good. Did they actually get the thing? It's very, very different performing something right after I taught it than it is to perform it a month later, 6 months later. Good. What else?
How like you could change the overall like
I love it. Excellent. So I give a end of year summative assessment. it's given on the last day of school. I can't change anything about my instruction with these students, but I can change my instruction for my next students. I love that. I absolutely love that. That is a really, really challenging thing to do, but it's an extremely important thing to do. Awesome. What else?
It's like for standardized testing, it's to see where a student stands in their grade level.
Okay, comparative, right?
Right.
It's an ability to compare something to something else. Formative assessment, we're really looking at how do you know this? How well do you know this? Summative assessment, we have that too, but we also have this ability to compare across students, the student to the curriculum, the student to themselves, all of these different things, right? So given that, why might unstructured summative assessments be more challenging? There's one word.
Well, I don't have one word.
Give it a shot.
I say because it has a lot of thought put into it.
Okay.
Mostly because the goal right there said is to determine what comes next. And you have to put a lot more thought into that than a split-second decision.
Okay.
Question you just made on top of your head.
Good.
You have to think about how your students will react. How will it be fair to them for this to determine long-term what happens?
So you said a lot more than one word, but you circled the one word. Set. Yeah?
Yes.
All right. What one word might Seth be describing? It's a technical word. It's a word based on assessment. You all know the word, but you probably don't use it so often.
Plan,
No? No? Validity. Summative assessments have to be valid. They have to be, you have to be sure that they, in order to compare, you have to be sure that they are related, they are valid to what you actually taught and valid to all your students the same way. All right. I'm actually going in past years, I've spent an entire week talking about validity and reliability. And when I do that, I talk about blank stares. Like it's not useful to what we are talking about, but I do think it's an important concept. So we are going to talk about validity a little bit. But what validity is saying is that, in a nutshell, that what you are testing is what you actually say you are testing. If I come up with a question on the spot and I make a formative decision about that, what's that going to impact? That's going to impact what I do over the next 30 minutes, maybe the next day. If I'm wrong, so be it. I lost a day. If I use an unstructured summative assessment where I have come up with some set of questions that I'm going to then use to compare students and make decisions over the long term, I better know that that question is actually meaningful, right? The extreme example would be I taught a unit on addition and subtraction, and I decide to give a summative assessment that has multiplication on it. That's not valid, right? I can't say anything about your ability to add and subtract if I assess you on multiplication. But I just came up with it, so how do I know? All right, so summative assessments are much more often going to be structured. What is something that might be okay as a summative or a summative assessment that is more unstructured? Not completely unstructured, but more unstructured.
Pretest?
No, no. And we'll come back to why I wouldn't separate those. I would still call a pop quiz structured. because you as the teacher have planned it and are asking questions for, if you're using it summatively, you planned it for good, with good reasons.
What about debate?
Okay, yes, but why? And what is a debate a form of as an evaluative tool?
Like, if you're reading a play, say you're reading Shakespeare, and you have one group represent like the Plebeian, the Coriolanus, and the other group represent the high class, and you have them pick a side and say why each one's correct and whatnot. And you can evaluate how they understand the story and what the context of the story is that way.
Okay, good. So let's start with how that is unstructured. It's unstructured in the sense that we're not looking for specific responses, right? We are leaving open to a wide array of ways to evaluate. So what if we say debate is an example of that? What is the larger category that would fall into? Wide array of responses, probably things that use rubrics to actually assess. Is an example of projects, right? So we have our typical tests, our typical assessments, and then anything that's more project-based. That can be a summative assessment, right? You put it all together. What's a really good, especially at the upper elementary and secondary level, what's a really good class that uses projects for summative assessments? Science classes, absolutely. Do the thing, actually do the thing. And I will grade you on how well you do the thing, okay? So those are similarities, differences, overlaps between formative and summative. Good. Any questions about that? Great. Okay. What we assess, so obviously we can assess anything, right? We talked about educational variables of interest, how wide-reaching that that entails. But what we assess can also be looked at in terms of curriculum-based assessments, the actual tool that we use, and curriculum-based measurement. All right. Curriculum-based assessment, I'll start there, are the assessments at their core. They are the assessments that come with the curriculum. Eureka Math is a common math curriculum being used in elementary schools right now. There is a curriculum, there is an assessment that comes with that. There are unit assessments. There's a beginning of the year assessment, a middle of the year, end of the year assessment. All right. Those assessments assess how well you mastered the curriculum. Got that? Make sense? I taught all the lessons. I, the student, learned all the lessons. I answered the questions that were related to the lessons. Curriculum-based measurement measures the curriculum to either a set of standards or objectives or a concept. All right. I can teach addition and subtraction till I'm blue in the face, but if I didn't teach it through the curriculum or in a way that actually taught the concept of addition and subtraction, then if it's presented in a different way, or if different types of questions are asked, then I may not do as well. All right, you see the difference between those two? Most schools have adopted a balance between these two. So there will be curriculum-based assessments that are oftentimes given for grades, and there will be curriculum-based measurements that are often used for progress monitoring. All right. What do I want to say? Yeah, okay. Be thinking about strengths and weaknesses of those two concepts. All right. Here, yeah, there we go. So a little bit more specific, curriculum-based assessment is valid and reliable to the material that has been covered. All right, there's those valid and reliable again. It's going to be tied to standards and objectives, but only those that are taught in the curriculum. All right, so if you have a curriculum that leaves out a standard or objective, then that's not going to be assessed. It still might be an important standard objective to cover at some point, but it's just not covered in this curriculum. One of the strengths of having curriculum-based assessments is the curriculum can then turn around and say, if the child missed these questions, do that lesson. These questions, do that lesson, or focus on this in the future. All right. And it allows you to make decisions relative to movement through the curriculum. So if I have a student that struggles, I can go back within this curriculum and just reteach lessons. And they should do well on that curriculum-based assessment. All that being said, it is important to understand that the curriculum-based assessment is limited to what is actually taught and assessed in the curriculum. Okay, so there can easily be concepts, content, standards, objectives that are not covered in a curriculum. Hopefully a good curriculum has been aligned to either state standards or national standards. Most of them have at this point. I can't imagine a school adopting a curriculum that hasn't at this point. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they've done it to the same degree across every single standard and objective. Some standards and objectives are easier to teach. Some are much, much harder to teach. Some curriculum might have an idea that on how to teach some concept that works really well for some groups of students and really poorly for other groups of students. So depending on the curriculum that you choose, you may end up with strengths or weaknesses within your population in certain areas. Curriculum-based measurements are built to identify those. All right. So what can we do then with a curriculum-based measurement? Right. Well, we can make curricular decisions. It's more long-term for sure. But we may be able to see, we for 3 years now, we've really struggled in oral word fluency. We need to supplement our curriculum, our early elementary reading curriculum, such that our students have more fluent oral word reading fluency. Okay. I can look at my own teaching within a curriculum. If I have students that are struggling with identifying the main idea of a passage, maybe I can place more emphasis on that area in my teaching. All right. That's not necessarily going to show up on your curriculum-based assessment because it might just not address that concept in a robust enough way. Okay. So this is not a situation where you really are going to have one or the other. This is something where to have a robust assessment package, you should end up with both. All right, cool. Any questions there? All right, we're going to be focusing more on curriculum-based measurement as we go throughout the semester, because curriculum-based assessments are literally given by the curriculum maker, right? You have more flexibility in how you interpret, how you implement, how you do things with curriculum-based measurement. With the curriculum-based assessment, here it is. Do it, right? That doesn't mean you can't analyze it, but you have no flexibility in what you ask and how you do it. All right, and then we spoke already about the how on Tuesday when we spoke about formal versus informal assessment. So and remember to distinguish to some degree structured versus unstructured from formal versus informal. So formal assessment, just as a reminder, is standardized. It's either norm or criterion reference. It has those specific testing procedures, so on and so forth, versus that informal, which is everything else, right? So how do we, how can we look at, right, too far? All of the question we want to ask is how can we look at all of these different formats as formal or informal, okay? So, early thoughts. I know I just kind of yapped at you for 40 minutes. What are your thoughts? But before we're gonna break into groups in a second, or small groups, smallish groups. What are your initial thoughts on what is better or worse? Let's start with those pejoratives. What is good, what is bad of those different types of assessment that I threw out? And obviously the answer is somewhere in the middle, but what do you guys think? Start with formative versus summative. Which is more important, less important, more daunting, less daunting? What do you think? Yeah.
I have a question about
Yeah.
formative versus summative. How can you use that data to see whether it falls in the student or the teacher? Because you could easily have a lesson that's just too easy, but everyone grades it good. So how do you know this falls on the teacher or just you have a good class?
So there's one good answer and one kind of wishy-washy answer, right? There's going to be a ceiling on how much analysis that you can do for given any type of assessment, right? If I have students that already knew the material, then my ceiling for how much information I can gather about my teaching from that is very low. I can't get very, very much at all, right? The good answer is I gave a pretest and I already know that they know it. So I know I'm not going to analyze my own teaching from this. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Good question. Good question. Formative or summative?
Summative's probably more daunting to deal with. Because it takes more, not necessarily more mental effort, but just more time and thought put into it. It's not like off the cuff kind of, because honestly, like you do have to put thought whenever you're improvising questions for students and trying to understand them. That's difficult. But whenever you have to put it on paper and stick with it and not improvise, that's probably
Good.
more hard than
The other. Okay, good. Yeah.
I feel like informal informal is the one that's summative.
They can both be either.
Okay, well, summative.
Yeah.
Moreover, I think can have more value, and you could possibly remove some of the daunting features of it. It's more important because they have deeper learning in the summative part than I feel like than they do in the formal, because now it's all collected together and it's not as fragile anymore. And
Good.
so, but you can also remove that daunting part by maybe making it open note, but instead of just giving them the answers in the class, they have to make the notes.
Okay, so I like what you pointed out there, that there's the word that I used earlier was synthesis, right? There's an opportunity for synthesis in summative that you don't really have in formative. Formative is this smaller piece. It's this check-in. How are we doing right now? But I can get through all those little formative pieces and then not have had any opportunities to put it all together, right? So as a teacher, I might be putting more weight into the summative assessment because it's a more real world application than just asking this one question, just doing this one worksheet. Yeah, good, good. What else? Yeah.
I feel like with summative, you already want to time for that in your lesson plan. So with formative, if you off the cuff have a bunch of formative assessments, you may be running out of time to fix your lesson.
Okay. There's definitely, when it comes to any sort of assessment, there's logistical challenges in the classroom of having high quality, meaningful assessment interactions, whether it's formative or summative, right? Good, good, yeah.
I was gonna say, although I agree that summative is more important, I also feel that formative is not as important, but it's still important to conduct throughout your lesson.
Good.
If you're not checking for understanding, if you're not assessing your students, you don't know where they stand or where your lesson should go next, et cetera, et cetera.
Good. And
It's as important.
I want to make sure everyone understands. I'm not saying whether one is more or less important.
Right.
I think that what you just pointed out is hugely important. Where if you get to a summative assessment and you don't know where your students are, you did something massively wrong. Like I will say that is unequivocal. And I've given done student teaching observations where teachers have missed formative assessment opportunities at every step of the way, right? And they get to whatever their summative piece is, whether it's during my observation or later on, and they're totally lost. They're like, oh my God, my kids didn't do well at all. I don't know how they missed this. I thought they were doing so well. That's not good enough, right? You have that tool right there for you. The formative assessment is what informs you what you should be doing. Now, it's possible that the synthesis issue, where I'm actually putting all these different things together, might trip your students up. But if it's just like one-to-one, you better know when you get to that summative exactly where your students are. You should never be surprised by how a student does on a summative. You really should. All right, good. What about curriculum-based assessment versus curriculum-based measurement? So one or the other, better, worse, more or less meaningful? What are your thoughts on this? Yeah.
I feel like curriculum-based measurement is probably, for me, more important because I found that a lot of curriculums don't think about the students as much, while curriculum-based measurements tend to bring the teacher and the students into account when making decisions, which are, like, I find that like curriculum-based measurements are kind of like a micro scale kind of, while curriculum-based assessment is like a macro kind of looking at it from the outside.
Okay, good, good. I think that there's definitely a lot of that, like student-centered versus curriculum-centered dichotomy there. And again, not myself making a value judgment, that's definitely a factor that needs to be considered. Good, good. What else? Any other thoughts? What about formal or informal? Standardized test versus an off-the-cuff question. Which is better? Which is worse? Which is more or less meaningful?
I feel like informal is like based on like your class, so you could like change afterwards, whereas formal is like cookie cutter.
Okay,
One thing.
good, good. So the informal assessments are maybe more valid to the actual level of your class. Whereas the formal assessment is just like, here's the box, where do you fit in it? Right? Good, good. What else?
I find informal assessments to be very, very important. Because the formal assessment, I find that's more of the end goal
Mhm.
that you're working towards. Because I can take a class, read a textbook, and then take a formal assessment. But the thing that makes a class interesting for students and teachers is being able to have those informal assessments where you get to understand what you're learning on a deeper level besides just information and then a formal assessment.
So there's definitely this like underlying feeling that formal assessment is more about checking a box. You did all the things, then you get to the end, then you check the box that you took the test. I think that is a well-deserved reputation in our educational environment.
Speaking from the perspective of someone who's, I haven't had a single constructive response exam until I got to college.
So that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a big problem. And I apologize that the education system failed you there, and I'm glad you're here and doing well. But no, like it can be easier. It can be we're going to talk about some of those the pros and cons of multiple choice versus constructed response well down the line. But like you can cover a lot of information, so there's definitely pros to that, but that shouldn't be the case, right? Like you need to be able to write, you need to be able to express, you need to be able to do these things. Good. All right, so here I'm gonna skip over the next couple of slides and we're gonna come back to that on Tuesday. But here's what I want you guys to do. So I like the idea of groups of 4 or 5, but if I want to give you guys the opportunity to work in wherever, however you're comfortable. So pairs are totally fine. But what I want you guys to be doing is having some conversations and just kind of like group off where you are. But I want you to have some conversation just on the overall pros and cons. I want you to be able to discuss with each other many of the ideas that we spoke about, but I want you to put some value judgments on the individual characteristics of these different types of assessments. So it's okay to say that something is better or worse, good or bad, but I also want you, in terms of a characteristic of any of these assessment types, but I also want you to be able to find the converse. Every single one of these, formal, informal, formative, summative, curriculum-based assessment, curriculum-based measurement, they all have pros, they all have cons. So I want you to be able to come up with 3 different lists. I'm not going to say how many items have to be on that list, but just of the pros and cons of each of those different categories, okay? In terms of your assignment, so I put assignment 1 up on Moodle, going to be due next week. I want you to take the ideas that you come up with today and go back and refine them on your own. All right. So in terms of what you're going to turn in, everyone's going to turn in their own individual assignment, but I want you to put whether or not you work, like who you worked with. So make sure you all know each other's names. This is if you like what your group comes up with, turn in what your group comes up with. But someone else in your group might say, I disagree with what we decided on, and I'm going to take it in a different direction. That's fine too. All right. So I want to be able to see where y'all kind of stand on that. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. If I just kind of say, make groups yourselves, can that happen? Okay, go. It's what time is it? It's 3:50 now, so we have about half an hour here still. Okay.